All right, let's dive right into this explainer, where we're going to break down the most audacious, meticulous, and, well, ultimately flawed heist in British history. I mean, we're looking at an event that sounds like it was ripped straight out of a Hollywood blockbuster script, right? But this actually unfolded in real life on a dark, quiet night back in 1963. The Great Train Robbery is just a masterclass in planning and execution, but it's also a perfect case study in the disastrous consequences of human ego. Over the next few minutes, we're going to dissect exactly how a crew of criminals managed to literally hijack a government train and pull off the heist of the century.
Just picture this, stealing a staggering 800 crore rupees from a moving train in the dead of night, and doing it all without firing a single bullet. That is the modern equivalent of the 3 million pounds they managed to make off with. The sheer scale of this robbery was completely unprecedented for the time. They didn't just walk into a bank, they took over a massive moving vault. It required absolute pinpoint precision and a level of coordination that honestly, most military operations would envy. So how exactly do you stop a speeding locomotive and casually walk away with millions?
Well, let's get into Act 1, the perfect storm, and see how you even begin to plan something like this.
To pull this off, the mastermind, a guy named Bruce Reynolds, put together a crew of 15 men. Now, Reynolds was a known figure in London's criminal underworld, but he and his initial buddies, they had zero experience with trains. They knew they needed serious specialists, so they brought in the South Coast Raiders, which was a gang with the gritty expertise required for this kind of heavy-duty job. For months, these 15 men just sat together, slowly piecing together what looked like an impossible puzzle. Their target was a Royal Mail train carrying 72 staff who were sorting parcels on the go, making its way through the night of August 7th. You've got to understand, this wasn't a passenger train. It was a dedicated postal express moving from Glasgow to London. It was this finely tuned machine that picked up and dropped off mailbags using nets without even stopping at most stations. The crew inside was just working their normal overnight shift, totally unaware that a mile-by-mile trap was waiting for them in the dark.
Now, here is where it gets really fascinating. The gang was being fed golden tips by a mysterious senior Royal Mail officer. This unknown insider is literally the linchpin of the whole operation. 3 years before this, the post office mandated that all high-value package, or HVP, coaches had to have alarms. But on this specific night, those alarmed coaches were out of service for maintenance. So the railway had to use a reserve coach, M3024M, which had absolutely zero security alarms. And on top of that, because of the previous week's bank holiday, the cash being transported wasn't the usual £300,000. It surged by 10 times, up to £3 million. This wasn't just a lucky coincidence. It was flawless inside intelligence. Which brings us to the actual execution in Act 2, the 15-minute window.
It's 3 a.m. on August 8th. The gang is lying in wait at Sears Crossing, ready to halt this moving behemoth. The train, driven by 58-year-old Jack Mills, is just hurtling through the night. Everything is perfectly on schedule, until Mills spots something really abnormal on the tracks ahead. And the wildest part is how surprisingly simple their trap was. You'd think they used high-tech gear, right? Nope. They used a literal leather glove and a portable battery to trick the driver into stopping. In an era before complex digital failsafes, simply covering the green signal with a glove and using a battery to light up the red one was all it took to hijack the entire railway signaling system. Seeing that red light, Jack Mills did exactly what he was supposed to do. He applied the brakes and brought the massive locomotive to a complete halt in the middle of nowhere.
Once the train stopped, the crew moved fast. They cut the emergency trackside phone lines. When the assistant driver stepped out to use that phone to call the signalman, he found a dead line, exactly as planned, and was instantly ambushed from the bushes. The robbers then swarmed the engine room. Jack Mills bravely tried to fight back, but he was brutally struck over the head with an iron rod, knocking him unconscious. Meanwhile, the rest of the gang uncoupled the high-value coach and the engine from the rest of the train, leaving the vast majority of those oblivious postal workers totally stranded in the back carriages. But, even the absolute most perfect plans have hiccups. Their plan hit a massive wall when their hired getaway train driver, who was actually retired, got into the cabin and realized the newer controls completely overwhelmed him. He just panicked and froze up. So, in a desperate pivot, the gang had to wake up a bleeding, disoriented Jack Mills and force him at knife point to drive the engine and the HVP coach 1 kilometer down the track to their designated drop-off point at Bridego Bridge. Down at the bridge, the clock is fiercely ticking. They have a strict 15-minute window. They broke into the coach, tied up the 5 postal workers inside, and got straight to work. They formed a human chain and flawlessly loaded 120 heavy bags of cash into a waiting Austin Lodestar truck. The sheer physical effort here is honestly mind-blowing. We are talking about moving 2.5 tons of cash, mostly in tiny 1 pound, 5 pound, and 10 shilling notes. They managed to haul 120 out of the 128 sacks down a steep embankment in the dark. They only left those last 8 bags behind because their meticulously calculated time window was closing, and they couldn't risk another second.
And that leads us perfectly into Act 3, the Monopoly mistake, where everything starts to fall apart.
So they successfully escape to their hideout, 43 kilometers away by 4:30 a.m., using Land Rovers with identical fake license plates to confuse any witnesses. They arrive at this rented property called Leatherslade Farm, and they're feeling absolutely invincible. The greatest heist in history was in the bag. But right before vanishing from the train, one of the robbers had threatened the tied-up staff, telling them not to move for exactly 30 minutes. In the heat of the moment, that probably sounded like a standard tough guy line, just to buy time for the getaway. The robber thought he was just scaring them so they wouldn't call the cops. But he inadvertently handed the authorities the most crucial piece of data they could have ever asked for.
As you can see, the police used that exact 30-minute time frame to mathematically deduce their location. The investigators knew exactly what time the gang left the bridge. By knowing they needed a 30-minute head start, the police literally just drew a circle on the map representing a 30-minute drive in a heavy loaded truck. Instantly, the search area shrank from the entire United Kingdom down to a highly specific 50-kilometer radius. They boxed them right in.
Now, picture the gang sitting at Leatherslade Farm, listening to the police closing the net via VHF radio scanners. The realization that their 50-kilometer radius had been compromised sent them into an absolute tailspin. Their carefully planned weekend retreat turned into this chaotic scramble. They abandoned the farm on Friday instead of Sunday, hurriedly dividing up the cash so each member walked away with the modern equivalent of 3.9 billion rupees.
In their blind rush, they actually paid an arsonist to burn the farm down and destroy the evidence. But the guy, he just took the money and ran, leaving the farmhouse completely intact. When a local tip-off eventually led the police to Leatherslade Farm, they found an absolute treasure trove. The empty mailbags were scattered everywhere, the getaway truck was there, hastily painted yellow to avoid detection, and incredibly, a Monopoly board was just left sitting out on a table.
Because they literally couldn't resist playing Monopoly with real stolen cash while they were hiding out, their fingerprints were left all over the pieces. It's an almost poetic level of irony, isn't it? They painstakingly wiped down the major surfaces, the doors, the counters, but completely forgot about the board game. And since these men were already known criminals, their prints were waiting right there in Scotland Yard's system. That game of Monopoly handed the police 14 of the 16 men on a silver platter, resulting in massive 30-year sentences.
Now, I think it's really crucial we pause and ground this explainer in the tragic human cost. It's so easy to get swept up in the slick planning and the insane amount of money, right? But Bridego Bridge is glamorized today, known to tourists as Train Robbers Bridge. Meanwhile, the innocent driver, Jack Mills, suffered immensely. That blow to his head caused severe trauma. It ended his career completely, and it ultimately led to his premature death just 7 years later. This so-called victimless crime had a very real, very tragic human victim.
Yet, maybe the most fascinating takeaway from all of this is a mystery that still lingers today. Out of the 16 men involved, 14 were caught by a board game. But the two most elusive pieces of the puzzle, the replacement train driver who panicked at the controls and that shadowy Royal Mail insider who masterminded the intelligence, they remain entirely unknown. They never showed their faces, they never left a print, and they took their secrets to the grave. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Who were they? And how did they manage to walk away perfectly clean from the greatest robbery of all time?